Museum in Fort Worth.
Two B-17s were going down, one in flames, the other one just in a dive.
A few days after the B-17 crashed into the German countryside, Manriquez made headlines in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram.
Wife clings to hope that Raul Manriquez is alive.
But Frances Manriquez knew just how tough her husband was. After all, she'd been reading about it for years.
I'm surprised to find as many articles as I have found about him.
Manriquez first appeared in the paper in 1933 as a standout Northside High School football player.
They used to call him the Galloping Ghost.
His son, Richard Manriquez, says the shifty halfback was only 5'5", but what he lacked in size, he made up for in toughness and speed.
He could stop on a dime and give you change.
Manriquez was so good, the Hispanic community threw a party in his honor the following year. The Mexican consul at Dallas was a key speaker.
I'm preparing tomorrow's dinner. That is the laid-back chick. Carrots, mushrooms, potatoes, red and white onions, and various spices, oil, a little bit of red wine vinegar. Gonna fall off the bone. This is the dress chick, all ready to go. Gonna fall off the bone. The red carpet's a little bit smaller this year. Dead by midnight. What are you guys looking for? Yeah, I lost him. Where'd he go? I can still hear him, but I lost him.
I have excelled in the Navy. I've also overcome hurdles.
Even the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says there's work to do.
Equality and opportunity are matters of military readiness, not just political correctness.
After the death of George Floyd, the Secretary of Defense created a permanent group to focus on diversity and inclusion. He also ordered photos to be removed from selection boards, which is the way the military decides who gets promoted. The goal is to take race out of the equation when making these decisions. That's because the data shows things are even worse when it comes to diversity in higher ranks. Here's what we've uncovered from Congressional Research Service stats. Looking at all the branches, when it comes to the senior enlisted ranks, 63 out of 100 are white, but only 19 out of 100 are black. The difference is even greater when it comes to senior officers. Almost 88 out of 100 are white, while only 8 out of 100 are black. That's 11 times more white officers in the military. And remember, these are the people who are making the decisions that affect those who serve below them.
But we are not perfect, and we must thoughtfully examine our institution and ensure it is a place where all Americans see themselves represented and have equal opportunity to succeed, especially in leadership positions.
That gap can lead to bigger problems, according to the nonprofit Protect Our Defenders. Retired Air Force Colonel Don Christensen says it can impact the military justice system. The organization examined 10 years of data and found more racial disparities.
It was disappointing that it was so widespread, so consistent, so persistent.
A report from the Government Accountability Office agrees. The congressional watchdog says, for example, in 3 military services, Black service members were about twice as likely as white service members to be tried in general and special courts martial. Christensen, who also served as a military lawyer, thinks the armed forces needs to diversify at the officer level in order to combat these trends. The Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, who is only the second black man in history to be that branch's top enlisted leader, explains this will be tough.
It doesn't matter if you're black or white. And it's incumbent upon all of us, certainly those of us in leadership positions, to create a space where people can feel comfortable talking about it.
Coming up.
You were outraged. You wrote this. Now, all 100 members of the Senate must do our jobs by providing advice and consent on the president's nominee. You wanted the Senate to go ahead and vote on Merrick Garland. I understand 9 months is longer than 6 weeks, but, sir, the principle is the same.
Well, here's states across our country. Half of our states, Americans are already voting for the next president. We're not 10 months or 9 months away from an election. We're just 44 days from an election, and an election where in half our states votes are already being cast. Second, the Republican majority set this new precedent. They set it in 2016. They fought hard for it. In fact, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, restated it in 2018. So if they were going to set a new precedent that in an election year there shouldn't be a hearing, meetings, votes, they should live by it. One of my friends, my colleague, Senator Murkowski, said in announcing that she would oppose any vote on a nominee before the next president is sworn in. Fair is fair. And I frankly think the Republican majority should live with the precedent they set in 2016. That. And so I've been appealing personally to my colleagues, Republicans and independents, to reflect on how this will impact the Senate, the Supreme Court, its legitimacy. We're already divided enough, Chris, and there's already enough important issues on the ballot this November. Health care is on the ballot. As you just said with Senator Cotton in your previous interview, the Supreme Court is hearing a landmark decision on just a week after the election, in which President Trump and 18 Republican states' attorneys general are trying to take away health care from 100 million Americans in the midst of a pandemic. And there's 6 million Americans who've been infected, meaning they may have new pre-existing conditions. And I'll remind you,
I don't mean to interrupt, Senator,
a key element of the Affordable Care Act is gender equity.
Senator, I understand all of that. I asked you a direct question, though. Is there anything Democrats can do to stop it?
Well, the Republican majority is going to be responsible for what we do in the next 44 days. We ought to be delivering relief from this pandemic. We ought to be taking up and voting on a package that will help schools open safely and support more vaccine research and support state and local governments. Mitch McConnell hasn't done that work in the 6 months since we last passed a relief package. That's what we should be doing, not rushing through a nominee.
Okay. During a call with all of the Democratic senators yesterday, your leader, Chuck Schumer, said this, and I want to put it up on the screen. If Republicans move ahead to confirm a justice, quote, then nothing is off the table for next year. Nothing is off the table. Does that mean, Senator, that if Democrats take back the majority in the Senate next year, that when you say nothing is off the table, that you will end the filibuster for legislation? Does it mean that you will pack the court, that you will add enough justices so that Democrats again have a majority on the court?
Well, for this election, meaning the consequences of this election for health care, for women's rights, for equality, for equity, for clean air and clean water are profound. And we should let the voters speak in this next election. I'll remind you again, half of our states are already voting for the next president. We should honor Justice Ginsburg's last wish and let the voters pick the next president pick the next justice. We shouldn't be racing through this partisan process, which will further divide us in the Senate, and I frankly think further undermine the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, an institution our democracy badly needs to function.
Let's focus, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to ask you to be brief here, sir.
Now, there's a huge amount at stake here, Chris. That's why Justice Ginsburg made this her dying wish. The legitimacy of the court will be harmed by its further politicization. Just 44 days before an election, when the Republican majority, just 4 years ago, when Justice Ginsburg's close friend Justice Scalia passed away, insisted on keeping that seat open for nearly 10 months. I think it further suggests to the American people that this is all about politics, not about principle. I'm going to be working this week to reach across the aisle and see if I can't persuade some friends to respect tradition, to respect the precedent they set in 2016, and to let the voters decide.
Now, the Democrats seem to believe that they're going to be having a president in the White House. I don't think so.
Prevents discrimination based on
justice to the Supreme Court in the final days before the election. And it's time now for our Sunday group, GOP strategist Karl Rove, Fox News at Night anchor Shannon Breen, who covers the Supreme Court for us, and Mo Alefi of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service. Panel, I've done some reporting on this, and here's what I have been hearing from a source, a top source close to the process. Republican senators and White House officials are pressing the president to announce his nominee before the first debate next week. A consensus seems to be developing in the Senate to hold confirmation hearings before the election, but delay a final vote till a lame duck session after November 3rd to protect vulnerable Republicans who are up for re-election. As for the nominee, the early focus in the White House, not settled yet, but the early focus is on two federal appeals court judges, Amy Coney Barrett of Indiana and Barbara Lagoa of Florida. Carl, what is your sense? I'm sure you're talking to people at the White House and in the Republican majority in the Senate. What's your sense of where this is at?
Well, I think you outlined it. I think the president is prepared to make a quick nomination. I suspect that the Senate is ready as soon as the FBI does its background check. One of the things about doing either one of these two appellate judges is that they were confirmed by the Senate in recent years. So the FBI background check will only need to be sort of an update, not a complete new deep dive. So the process is on its way, I suspect, in a rather rapid fashion.
Do you think the confirmation hearing happens before the election, but the actual vote happens after? They hold that for the lame duck?
I wouldn't be surprised to see the committee hold hearings and maybe even vote before the election, but I don't expect that with just over 44 days, I guess it is, that it will be possible to bring this all the way to the floor before the election.
Okay. McConnell sent this letter to his GOP colleagues on Friday night. I urge you to keep your powder dry. This is not the time to prematurely lock yourselves into a position you may later regret. So I guess the question, Carl, is with Murkowski and Collins already saying that they have real problems doing this before the election, how confident are you that McConnell will have 50 Republican votes plus the tiebreaker from Pence? And if he doesn't have the 50 votes, do you think he still goes ahead just to show the base they are keeping faith with them?
Yeah, I think he's likely to have the 50 votes. In fact, I think he'll have more than 50 votes to take up this matter and to bring the nomination to the floor. And if need be, before the election, pass it, though I think it'll be after the election. I do want to quickly say I loved the flip-flop. We had Tom Cotton taking Senator Coons' view of several years ago and Senator Coons taking Tom Cotton's view of several years ago. It reminds me of that political scientist and ethicist, Captain Louis Renault. I'm shocked to find there's gambling going on here. The famous line from Casablanca. I'm shocked there's politics going on here. That we have one president at a time, one Senate at a time. They have constitutional powers to nominate, and in the case of the Senate, to either give their advising consent or withhold their advising consent. We're seeing it played out in front of us.
No,
I have a pre-existing condition. And I got insurance.
appointee with a Republican appointee. This is replacing what was arguably the loudest, strongest leader of the liberal bloc on the court for the last couple of decades, with somebody who would have completely different philosophical and judicial ideas about the way you interpret the Constitution, the text of laws, just a completely different philosophy. So it would be substantively a massive shift to the court to replace that one seat in a court that's pretty evenly divided these days on some very, very big issues, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking now 4-4 with Roberts as the swing vote. We'd be talking 6-3. So Roberts could do anything he wanted, and you'd have 6 reliably, solidly conservative justices. Speaking of Roberts, Shannon, is this Chief Justice Roberts' worst nightmare to have the court and the confirmation of another justice injected into the final days of a presidential campaign?
Yeah, you know that he tries valiantly to make the court apolitical as possible. He doesn't want it ever to be viewed as a group of Democrats or Republicans. He's publicly said there aren't Trump appointees, there aren't Obama judges. There can be appointees, but they don't then have a loyalty to a specific party or ideology. Judges are supposed to be neutrals. He said umpires calling balls and strikes. I think that for him, there are a number of long-term and short-term issues. And you think about this, if we're at 8-8 going into a very divisive election where we're going to have fights over mail-in ballots and all kinds of other extended deadlines, you don't want a case to end up at the Supreme Court that would decide the presidency with a potentially split down the even tie court. Chris?
We got about a minute left. Carl, I just want to ask you a basic question of fairness. Do you worry at all? I know we talked about principles and power. Do you worry at all that there could be a backlash from undecided voters who just say, it just doesn't seem fair for the president to nominate someone and for the court to go ahead and confirm someone just days before the election?
I think that's a legitimate concern. I think a lot of this is going to depend upon how the American people perceive the nominee herself. If they look at it and say, this is an accomplished individual, I'm willing to accept it. I would remind you that on November 13th, 1980, after being defeated for re-election, President Jimmy Carter nominated Stephen Breyer to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, the New England Appellate Court. And it was approved less than a month later by an 83-10 vote. If he were not appointed to the First Circuit with a lame duck appointment, it's unlikely he'd be on the Supreme Court today. So these things have a way of working out. It all depends on the nominee.
Here is that there hasn't been progress. Things are worse, not better. How much worse?
Because of the pandemic, we've had huge setbacks. In some cases, erasing literally decades of progress. And so it really underscores that we've got to bring this pandemic to an end, not just in a few rich countries, but the entire world. And then we'll have to take special efforts to build back so we're back on that positive track that we normally this time of year are getting to talk about, and thank the voters for their generosity with the foreign aid that plays a key role in all that progress.
How has COVID reversed what's been a 20-year streak of progress in places like Africa? For instance, how has COVID caused such a dramatic increase in extreme poverty in developing countries?
Yeah, so the actual death toll in the poorest countries, including most of Africa, has actually not been super high. The population is very young, and other than South Africa, the numbers have been less than was forecast. Sadly, though, the fragility of their health system, that, if people can't go out and get the vaccines, children are at risk of diarrhea and malaria. And so both the vaccination rates have gone down by over 14%, which takes us back in time over 2 decades. And that extreme poverty, which is another one that had been going down constantly, has gone up. So they have 37 million people back in extreme poverty. And so the breadth of the negative impacts, mental health, education, economic, and other health things, not just COVID directly, are much greater than I expected before we started to pull the report together.
Now, the Gates Foundation.
5 conservatives now. If the president gets another nominee, 6 conservatives, so the court would be solidly conservative for decades to come.
Pete Williams at the Supreme Court this morning. Pete Williams, thank you. And now joining me now is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Casey Hunt. So, Casey, what's realistic here? You heard Pete Williams say the average time is over. We're 44 days from the election. Ironically, the last time somebody got nominated and confirmed in less than 44 days was Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who actually it happened in 42 days. What's the realistic timeline on Capitol Hill?
Well, Chuck, I think that the person you want to watch in this is obviously Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader. And while there are practical questions about the timing, there are also political questions. And I think that is going to drive every conversation and every decision about this. There are two things Mitch McConnell cares about: maintaining the Republican control of the Senate, which of course is on the line coming up on Election Day, and getting a conservative Supreme Court. So if you think about it in those terms, there are some political arguments for waiting until after the election to have a vote on the floor of the Senate. There are also political reasons to try and have a confirmation hearing before Election Day. That would keep this in the news on the front burner. It's something that traditional Republicans, perhaps Republicans who have problems with President Trump but have supported the party for a long time, it's something that matters to them quite a bit. And many of these Republican Senate candidates have been running a couple points in polls behind where President Trump is against Joe Biden. And Republicans see this issue as something that could help them there. But of course, the outcome of the election could then also drive this, because the next question is, does Mitch McConnell have the votes? And there is a certain element of risk in waiting until after Election Day, because if Joe Biden were to win in a landslide and many of these Republicans were to lose their seats, that may take McConnell's two goals out of tension. He would maybe no longer have to worry about maintaining the Senate majority, but it might mean that some of those Republicans who lost would have a different calculation about how to handle this. Chuck.
Casey Hunt, I think you laid it.
I think he's talking about the fact that there's reforms that we've all looked at that you could consider. You and I have talked about this before on the show, but again, I'm not going to concede this. This is the position of a woman who never gave up, right? When people told her she couldn't do things, she kept going. Well, I'm not going to give up that some of my colleagues here, when we already have three of them having said that they believe that the next president, whoever wins the election, they're not saying who that's going to be, whoever wins the election should be able to pick the justice. Then we can talk about the reforms, because what this matters right now is what mattered 3 days ago before she died, and that is that people have to vote. And they vote, and they have to vote, as Michelle Obama said, like their life depends on it.
Well, I think you think they're going to do that, but as you know, trying to get some folks to stick by their word is something that seems to be very hard these days. So again, assuming you don't get that, there's going to be confirmation hearings before Election Day. Do you think you can stop a confirmation vote before Election Day?
Again, as Senator Schumer says, there's a lot of things we can try to do, but in the end, I'm not going to concede any of that, because my colleagues, and I do have some facts on my side here. You have a number of them that haven't said what they're going to do. You have a number of them that have already said that the next president should make the decision. You have the precedent of the only time a justice died this close to an election. Abraham Lincoln was president, and he made a decision to wait until after the election. And you have the fact that the people are voting right now. And I think that creates pressure on my colleagues, honestly. That's what a democracy is about. They don't want to have the Affordable Care Act thrown out, and when you have hundreds of millions of Americans with pre-existing conditions. Are you kidding me? That's in front of us. They don't want to have more money thrown into our elections, or while the fires are blazing on the West Coast, they don't want to have other justices that are so conservative.
The Affordable Care Act is not affordable.
Confirmation of a new justice had to wait for voters to decide
of a presidential election, and if both the White House and the Senate are of the same party, they go forward with the confirmation.
So, you know, I have scoured all of these 2016 notes, looking for these footnotes that have been added now. You guys have this new explanation. Never once on the Senate floor, when election is just months away in 2016, you said that people should be allowed to consider possible Supreme Court nominees as one factor in deciding who they'll support for president. This shouldn't even really be controversial. Then you said this is not about the person, it's about the principle involved, and I want to give the American people a voice in this. Republicans have said there should not be a bitter political fight. We have called on the president to spare the country this fight. The best way to avoid the fight is to agree to let the people decide. Senator, these are your words. Not once did you say, oh, it depends on what party the Senate holds versus the party of the president. This just sounds like a power grab, pure and simple.
Well, it is the Biden. You haven't had Merrick Garland. You haven't had since 1888, when a party of the Senate and the House and the White House were of different parties, that anyone was confirmed, and that was the situation with Merrick Garland. Chuck Schumer said the same thing at the end of George W. Bush's term, that if the vacancy occurred with the President Bush, a Republican in the White House, and the Democrats under Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer in charge of the Senate, that they would not confirm. But now when you have both the parties in the White House and the Senate, historically, the confirmation goes forward. And that's what's going to happen here. I'll tell you what's going to happen.
Senator,
and the president's going to make a nomination, I believe, this week.
Look, I get that. But, Senator, nobody in the Senate Republican Conference was arguing these fine footnote points that you and your other colleagues are arguing now. I want to play a clip for you from 2018 from Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
All right.
Hold the tape.
Senator, I guess the question is, should viewers just not believe anything you're saying today, because whatever you're saying today will change depending on the politics of the moment?
Well, I can tell you what's going to happen, Chuck. For viewers who are watching, the president is going to make a nomination. I believe it's going to be this week. And Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, we will hold hearings, and there will be a vote on the floor of the United States Senate this year. The president has a list of 20 potential nominees. He's mentioned several of them last night. And I really do think that if the president really wanted to make a powerful, positive statement by coming forth with a woman nominee, there are many qualified women on his list, somebody who could then be a role model for future attorneys, for young women and young men looking into the law. I think that would be the right move for this president soon.
Being pregnant is not a pre-existing condition. Sorry to tell you that. So why should everybody else pay for your abortion? Somebody doing a campaign ad for Congress.